I was thinking about a novel that I read in high school, which has been made into a movie at least two times. It's kind of a classic of science fiction, and I rarely read novels, but this is a classic science fiction film. I think they made one in the 50s, they made another one in the 70s. And the author has the same last name as my mother's family, Jack Finney. So I was thinking about a novel that I read, which is called The Body Snatchers. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of The Body Snatchers, but The Body Snatchers, it's a novel. It was published in 1954, which was kind of a pivotal year in the history of the United States. That was Joe McCarthy's downfall. That was the year of the lynching of Emmett Till, which kind of launched the modern civil rights movement. That was a moment where McCarthyism kind of reached its peak. The Rosenbergs were executed. Joe McCarthy started to lose his popularity. Stalin had died. Height of the Cold War, and they published this science fiction novel called The Body Snatchers. And basically, the premise of the novel is that there's this doctor, this wealthy doctor who lives in Southern California, and he goes to visit one of his friends, and they find a body in like the closet or the basement or something. But the body is still being formed. It's not a dead person. It's like growing, and it's becoming a copy of the person who lives in the house. And gradually they piece together that some alien species has come to Earth, and they have these pods, and they copy the people who do exist. And the person dies, and then they replace the person as kind of a surrogate. And then they plant more pods, and eventually, the idea is that all the humans will die off, and the pods will eventually then just go find another planet in space, and it's this weird species, this outer space plant thing that copies people, that copies people and replaces them, and it's constantly looking to expand. Now, the piece is obviously an anti-communist analogy. At the time, there was all kinds of phobia in the United States of communist infiltration. The idea was that the communists, they have people in the government, people in the military that are just living normal lives. They're sleeper cells. They look just like normal people, but they're actually communist agents. And on the surface, that's what the novel is pretty clearly about. It is a McCarthyist novel about the enemy within. But it's a little bit deeper than that. I was thinking about this today, and I was kind of reviewing aspects of the novel. So the reason that it's pretty obviously an anti-communist novel is at one point, the body snatchers are trying to recruit the doctor and his wife. And they say, basically, we're going to win anyway. So you might as well just surrender. And it's while you're asleep that the aliens copy your body and come up with your replacements while you're asleep. They say, look, eventually you're just going to fall asleep. And once you fall asleep, we're going to copy your body, and you will then be replaced with, so you might as well just voluntarily surrender. Resistance is futile, kind of like the Borg in Star Trek or something like that. Resistance is futile. And then the way that you can tell if someone is really a person or one of the body snatchers is that they have no emotions. Right? The replacement humans don't have human emotions. They just kind of go through the motions. They say the right things, but they don't feel beneath it. And what was interesting is, the speech that the body snatcher alien is giving to the humans, like, surrender, join us, you might as well, we're going to take over anyway, and we are the future. It's obviously supposed to be an analogy for communism, right? The communists, we are the future, your system is doomed, your children will be communists, etc. But the other thing is the fact that the body snatchers have no emotions, right? That the difference between the humans that are actual humans and the ones who are actually the body snatchers is that the humans that are actually human have real feelings, and the body snatchers do not. And that was a big point of anti-communist propaganda in the 1950s. Um, and it actually pointed. Something that comes up in a lot of ex-communist memoirs. And it's quite interesting. Is that they point to there is a kind of a coldness in people that are very, very active in communist groups. There's a lot of memoirs and autobiographies of people that were in the Communist Party and left, and they talk about a kind of coldness that they experienced in the organizations. And of course, they mean it in this. They're brainwashed, they're in a cult, but that's not that. They're referring to, and you read it in a lot of ex-Communist Party memoirs, even people that are sympathetic. They talk about how, when some atrocity would be reported, when you'd hear about the US government committing some atrocious crime, they'd say, "What do you expect from the bourgeoisie?" And there was kind of this coldness, this kind of indifference. And that at demonstrations and protests, there was kind of a very performative anger at society, a performative, contrived anger at the system. But in their regular interactions, the communists were quite cold. And that, there are numerous people who talk about how they were in the party, and these were their best friends. These are people they're very close to, and they're being expelled for some reason. And these people that they thought were their friends, that they cared about, had this cold indifference toward them as they're, subjecting them to, a trial and an expulsion from the organization. And that struck home with me because in my experience with communist groups, there is a really big level of that. But at the same time, I think what is being pointed to is not something scary, particularly about communism. It is rather the fact that, and this is what the authors of these anti-communist diatribes are missing, is that, the stakes were very high. The stakes were very, very high. And, I mean, you think about what, this is the 1950s. 1954 is when the novel was published, right? These are people who all their friends are going to federal prison for being communists. The FBI is coming to their job and getting them fired from their job for being communists. And they're coming out of World War II, where the communists were the leaders of the anti-fascist resistance cells in France and in Germany and Japan. Communists got jobs in factories in Korea. And, if they caught you in a fascist country organizing an underground communist resistance cell, they put you up against the wall and shot you. And that when you're involved in high stakes situations, you think even before that, during the Great Depression, the labor struggles that were going on, where people had guns on picket lines and there were, labor unions occupying factories. And I mean, these were situations where the stakes were very high. And when the stakes are that high, you can't afford to panic and get emotionally invested in every relationship. And that coldness that's being described in anti-communist memoirs, it's probably something very similar to when police officers, I mean, a cop, right? Or a family court, someone who works in a family court and has to deal with child custody cases. And if you're dealing in situations where the stakes are very high, where people are getting hurt, you can't get worked up about everything. A kind of coldness kind of comes over you because it's the only way you can deal with it. And I think that's what they're missing, right? Is that ordinary people who are just living their lives, if they come to understand the US government is killing people all over the world and, bombing millions of people in Korea, they get really angry about it and they get worked up. But if that's your bread and butter, right? If that's the world you live in as a communist activist, you're well aware of how evil American imperialism is. You're well aware of how evil this system is, and you've made a decision to get involved in struggling against it at a quite high risk. In order to do that, you kind of have to glaze over. You can't just digest every injustice in the same way that somebody who is just learning about it would, right? Most people, especially in the 1950s, thought that America was the greatest country in the world. And they thought the American government was, sugar, spice, and everything nice, never did anything wrong, Dudley do right. And so, for them to understand that the US government did all these evil things, there was a huge level of emotion that would come out. And for the people for whom that was their bread and butter, and for whom, they'd been involved in armed struggles on the picket line and all of that, a coldness did come across. And they talk about this is something psychological that develops in a lot of different fields of life. Back to the whole body snatcher thing. It is apparently a tradition in medical school. I've never been to medical school, so I wasn't aware of this. But apparently, on your first day at medical school, they bring a cadaver, a dead body, to the medical school, and they put it on the table, and they hand you a knife and say, "Get to work, cut it up." And the reason they do that on the first day is because if you're not ready to understand that, we're going to be cutting up the body of a dead person, you're not supposed to be there, right? If you're going to learn to be a surgeon, if you're going to learn to be a medical doctor, you have to be able to think this isn't a person I'm cutting up. This is a corpse. And yes, it's gross, but this is what it means to be a doctor. And you learn to detach emotionally from your work. And that a doctor has to be able to tell somebody, look, you have cancer, you're going to die. A doctor has to be able to tell somebody, look, we're going to have to amputate your leg. And that a doctor can't be emotionally worked up in the work that he does. And that doctors learn to split from their work. And so do a lot of professions have that. And that they talk about people, if you've ever met a nurse or a doctor, someone who works in the medical field, you can be sitting, eating with them, and they'll start talking about, bowel movements or intestines or things that you just don't want to think about while you're eating. But for them, that's just, they have to deal with it. And they develop kind of a coldness and a tolerance of these things. And that is how these things work. And that I think what these anti-communists or ex-communists were detecting was there's a level of coldness that develops when you're in a revolutionary organization, especially at that time when the labor movement of the 1930s was very intense. It was a life and death struggle. World War II and the struggle against fascism was very intense. It was a life and death struggle. And then McCarthyism, very heavy persecution is going on. It shouldn't be surprising that these people developed kind of a cold exterior. And that, it's interesting when I often quote the Little Red Book where Mao Zedong talks about the masses are the real heroes. We ourselves are often childish and ignorant. And I think on some level, Mao Zedong is referring to the fact that the masses have more emotion about this. We are seeing it to some degree or other from a distance. We understand about imperialism. We understand capitalism and how it's developed. We understand the crisis of overproduction. We are able to look at the big picture and why things are happening, and that makes us colder about it. Whereas the masses that are just learning, especially if they are responding to their real conditions, for them it is explosive anger. And that is what drives them to go out and sometimes do heroic and almost suicidal things that we in our cold and calculated, big picture view wouldn't want to do. And I think that's what Mao is referring to in the Little Red Book. And so when I was looking over, kind of a summary of this novel I read in high school, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and they talked about how, the body snatchers are obviously an analogy for the communists, right? They're, the enemy within, etc. And how on top of that, this coldness, this lack of emotion is a very common stereotype about communists. That made me think of that. However, what I also thought was interesting is that at the same time, it was making an anti-communist analogy. There was also a degrowth Malthusian undercurrent, which I didn't pick up on when I first read the book. I was a high school student. I just learned about communism, so I figured, okay, I understood that it was anti-communist. And it was just a good story. But there is a Malthusian undercurrent because they ask the aliens, why are you doing this? Why are you coming to our planet? You're going to replace every person and then kill them and then eventually just set up to go to another planet. Why? Well, we just want more. Growth is the nature of life, and we just have to grow. They're a fungi, and they just have to keep growing, and there's an attack on growth, right? The reason the body snatchers are doing it, they just need more and more and more, right? And it's that anti-growth sentiment that it's that Malthusian undercurrent, right? If you read the writings of Margaret Sanger, the founder of the Birth Control League and Planned Parenthood, she was originally a Marxist, and then she turned against Marxism. And in the pamphlets that she wrote against Marxism, which I frequently quote, she says the problem isn't capitalism. The problem is mankind's inherent tendency to expand. That is a Malthusian belief, the belief that human beings drive to procreate, human beings drive to live longer and have more children, have a longer life expectancy, and have a comfortable life. They believe that that is the problem. Marxism does not believe that. Marxism celebrates that. And in fact, Marx argued that the only way the ultimate higher stage of communism could be achieved is with a world with so much wealth and abundance, the very need for the state could vanish. And Marx's whole career, everything that Marx wrote, you read The Poverty of Philosophy, you read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Friedrich Engels, all of it is saying that capitalism does not have the ability to keep growing and expanding. That capitalism has this problem that never existed before in human history, which is poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance, overproduction. And that at the same time that these aliens are clearly communists because they're saying that, oh, we want to advance human history, oh, it's inevitable, join us, we are the future. They have no emotion, they're secretly infiltrating from within. Obviously that's the communists. There is this, they believe in growth, right? And that growth and expanding, we need more and more and more. There is this Malthusian critique of what they are also. And that comes across in the novel as well. So it's interesting that there is kind of a thing there. Now, somebody joined the studio. Anway, you need to show your face. You need to turn your camera on. That is my rule, is that you have to be able to see your face, or else I'm going to have people dropping in here and acting a fool. I might still get that anyway. But anyway, if you can turn your webcam on, I'll bring you on. Happy to bring you on. And other people are welcome to join as well. So Anway, just turn your webcam on and then I can bring you into the program. You just turn your webcam on. That is my request. I do need to be able to see your face, because if not, I'm going to get people hiding behind their avatars, acting a fool. But yeah, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. One thing I remember about the novel that I particularly enjoyed was that there's a lot of stories to make a point. There's a lot of like stories within a story, that make a point. And like, there's a lot of little anecdotes, I guess you could call it. Where, at one point, the psychologist is trying to tell them that they're hallucinating about this body. And so he tells them many stories about, psychological research and how people's minds play tricks on them. I thought that was very interesting. There's also at one point when they find out that these body snatchers are among them. They're these people that are not really people. They're just playing the role. He compares it, and it's very interesting. He compares it to how they're, when somebody is at work, they I don't want to give it away, and it's kind of racial actually. How when somebody is at work, they put on a face, but they may not actually like the people that they're selling to or the people they're dealing with, but they have to because it's their job. And he talks about that, and that, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting novel. It's certainly an interesting novel. I rarely, especially at that age, did a fiction book hold my attention. It was quite rare in that age that a fiction book would hold my attention, but that one did hold my attention. And it did hold my attention. Sorry to hear that, Anway. Lost connection here. There ain't light. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that. I would love to have you come on. Anyone who wants to jump on the stream, the phone lines are open. But yeah, I was thinking today about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the classic science fiction novel. That was certainly on my mind today. Written by Jack Finney. I think it's just called The Body Snatchers. The movie that they made of it was called Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And it has I guess, spoiler alert, it has a happy ending, right? The way the novel ends, spoiler alert, the way the novel ends is they discover like a farm where they're growing all these pods to expand the body snatcher operations. And the guy pours gasoline on them. And it's like he thinks it's his last hurrah. It's his last, chance. He figures they're going to win anyway, but he's at least got to go down fighting. So he lights them all on fire and he just burns this whole field of body snatcher pods. And then he's shocked when the body snatchers retreat and they all start flying up into space and they go away because they realize the humans will resist. The humans will not accept them, and so it's better to just find a new planet to go and take over. And I thought that was quite interesting. And they're not the body snatchers. They're not trying to conquer the planet and rule. They're just trying to eventually kill everyone, right? And then they'll set up and then they'll float off to a new planet, right? That's the interesting thing is they're not conquerors in the sense that they're going to take over and become, the rulers over the earthlings and make the humans their slaves. It's not that at all. They're just going to have every person's body be copied and eventually die and then set up to send their pods out into space to find a whole new planet to do that to. And that's the point, is that they're like a parasite. They're like a destructive fungi, right? And then again, there's that speech where then when they confront the one body snatcher, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? He says, oh, because we want more. That's just the nature. We want more and more and more. And that's an attack on growth, right? And that attack on growth has become synonymous with anti-capitalism in our time. And that is not Marxist at all. You know, um, you know, um, it's certainly not Marxist at all. Marx believed in growth, right? Marx wanted to create a society with so much wealth and abundance, and he saw that capitalism inherently holds back that, and that the idea that there's something inherently wrong with growth, that is Malthusianism, right? It's the idea that the way that we need a stable capitalism, we need a capitalism that is forcibly stabilized so there's balance in the world, right? And that is very much the Malthusian concept. We've talked about this to death on these streams. And look, sometimes we get on here and I make a big political speech, and other times we get on here and I just talk about movies and I talk about life and things like that. And